और आइए सीधे आपको लिए चलते हैं विदेश मंत्रालय की प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में।
On the dais, Shri Prabhat Kumar, OSD, ER and DPA, as well as Joint Secretary looking after Public Policy and Research, PPNR, Dr. Sumit Seth. Sir, without further ado, I'll hand over the microphone to you, but just with one comment, but perhaps at the question stage, this is a special briefing on this topic. This is not a press conference in the beginning of the year with foreign secretaries. So, so is yours, sir.
That shall come in fullness of time. Okay, thank you very much, Rindam. And very good afternoon to our friends from the media, to this special briefing this afternoon. I think the first one, my first one of the new year. So let me take this opportunity, first of all, to wish each one of you and your families all the very best for the new year. Good health, well-being of the soul to all of you. I'm very happy to announce a new and unique initiative that India will be taking this year. We will be hosting a special virtual summit on 12th and 13th January 2023. That is the next week. This summit, which will be called the Voice of Global South Summit, under the theme Unity of Voice, Unity of Purpose, essentially envisages bringing together countries of the Global South and share their perspectives and priorities on a common platform across a whole range of issues. More than 120 countries are being invited for this Voice of Global South Summit. This initiative is inspired by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi's vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas or Sabka Prayas, and is also underpinned by India's philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. As you are aware, India has always been in the forefront and consistently championed the cause of the developing world. We have been strongly articulating the interest and concerns of our partners in the Global South in all international fora and mechanisms. Now, you're all aware of the recent global developments which have severely impacted the developing world across many domains. Some elements of this impact include: one, of course, the COVID pandemic and the impact that the pandemic has had, a serious impact that the pandemic has had on countries across the world. The impact of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, increasing difficulties of access and affordability of food, fertilizer and fuel, and hence the derivative challenges of food and energy security. Climate change, in particular issues relating to climate finance and climate technology. Increasing burdens on developing countries in the areas like mounting debt, inflationary pressures that are also beginning to take toll on the structural parameters of their economies. Often, however, these concerns of the developing world do not receive due attention and space on the global stage. Often also, the relevant existing platforms have proven to be inadequate in addressing these challenges and concerns of the developing countries. As such, a consultative and outcome-oriented conversation focused on the most pressing concerns, interests, and priorities of the developing countries is the need of the hour. The Voice of Global South Summit is India's endeavour to provide a common platform to deliberate on these concerns, interests and priorities that affect the developing countries. Also, to exchange ideas and solutions, and most importantly, to unite in voice and purpose in addressing these elements of our concerns and priorities. India will work to ensure that the valuable inputs generated from partner countries in the Voice of Global South Summit deliberations receive due cognizance globally. India's ongoing presidency of the G20 provides us a special and strong opportunity to channelize these inputs into the deliberation and discourse of the G20. While assuming our presidency, you would recall, Prime Minister Modi had said that India's G20 priorities would be shaped in consultation with not just our G20 partners, with whom we, of course, cooperate and consult very closely, but also with our fellow travelers in the Global South, whose voice often goes unheard. This summit will thus also be an opportunity for those countries that are not part of the G20 process, especially those countries that are not part of the G20 process, to share their ideas and expectations through this mechanism with the G20. In terms of the broad outline of the program of the summit, which is still in a planning phase and is developing and evolving, the summit envisages 10 sessions over a period of 2 days. As I said, these are still being planned. 2 of these sessions are planned to be held at the levels of the head of the state and head of the government, and 8 sessions will be at the ministerial level. Each session would have a set of 10 to 20 countries participating in each of these sessions. Naturally, as we would expect, the 2 leaders sessions would be hosted by the Prime Minister. The remaining 8 sessions would be led by various ministers with the participation of their counterparts from the invited countries. And as I mentioned in the beginning, more than 120 invitations are being sent across for participation across these 10 sessions. Inaugural leaders session would be in the forenoon of the 12th, and the theme of the discussions in that inaugural session would revolve around Voice of Global South for human-centric development. The Finance Minister session, which is expected to be one of the ministerial sessions, the discussions in Finance Minister session would revolve around the theme of financing people-centric development. Given that key element of development has to focus on centricity of people, the theme of this session is being planned and shaped accordingly. The Environment Minister session, which would be another ministerial session, would focus on the theme on balancing growth with environment-friendly lifestyles. You are all aware of the initiative that the Prime Minister launched, which was Lifestyle for Sustainable Environment. The idea is that this session would afford an opportunity for the ministers to focus on sustainable lifestyles that are also green and environment friendly at the same time. The Foreign Minister sessions, one of the 2 Foreign Minister sessions, would be on the theme of priorities of the Global South, ensuring a conducive environment. On day 2 of this summit, we would be looking at essentially 5 ministerial sessions and of course the concluding session. Of these 5 ministerial sessions, many would be held in parallel because of the need to factor in the different time zones and also to accommodate widest possible participation in these sessions. So 3 parallel sessions would be in the first half of January 13th. We are still developing the timelines of the program and the specificity. One of them would be the Energy Minister session, which would focus on the theme Energy Security and Development, Roadmap to Prosperity. Then there would be in parallel the Health Minister session, which would focus on the theme and naturally coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic as the world is doing, to focus on cooperation to build resilient healthcare systems. That would be the theme of the Health Minister's session. The Education Minister's session would focus on the theme of human-centric development and capacity building among the countries of the Global South, an element which is a very important element in the development journey of the countries of the Global South. The 2 more parallel sessions which would be held in the second half of day 2 on January 13th. The first of them would be the Commerce and Trade Ministers session, which would be focusing on the theme, broadly speaking, titled Developing Synergies in the Global South, Trade, Technology, Tourism and Resources, an important element of cooperation among the countries of the Global South. And given the Indian presidency, the ongoing Indian presidency of the G20, the Foreign Minister session on day 2 would focus on the theme G20. It is as straightforward as it can be. G20 suggestions for India's presidency. We would like to hear from countries that are not members of the G20 to share with us as to what they think in their scheme of things could be included in the discourse within the framework of the G20. The concluding leader session will be hosted by the Prime Minister on the theme which I read out in the beginning itself, which is the unity of voice, unity of purpose. And at the conclusion of the summit, we propose to release a summary of priorities and perspectives, inputs and ideas that the participating leaders and ministers would hopefully share during the summit. Let me stop here with those brief opening remarks with regard to the Voice of Global South Summit proposed for 12th, 13th January, and try and see if how many of your questions I can take and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As I said, we'll open the floor for questions, but before that, again, please stick to the topic that is in there. And since I saw you first, I'll start with you, but I'll take the questions. One round.
गुड आफ्टरनून सर.
Please introduce yourself and the organization.
हैप्पी न्यू ईयर सर. सर मैं कविता जोशी हूँ, हरिभूमि न्यूज़पेपर से. सर आपने जैसे अभी कहा स्टार्टिंग में अपने ओपनिंग रिमार्क्स में कि ये जो समिट है ये ग्लोबल डेवलपमेंट्स के साए में हो रहा है, जिसमें कोविड पेंडेमिक और यूक्रेन क्राइसिस, फूड एंड एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी है. सर इस इशू पे क्या ये जो तमाम इश्यूज हैं और ये जो समिट होने वाला है इसमें 100 से ज़्यादा कंट्रीज आ रहे हैं, क्या चाइना का और यूक्रेन का हमने उनको इनवाइट किया है और उनका किस तरह का पार्टिसिपेशन समिट में रहेगा? सर इसी से जुड़ा हुआ क्या समिट के एंड में कोई जॉइंट डिक्लेरेशन भी मतलब सामने आएगा? थैंक यू सर.
I'll take a few together. One by one.
So I'm Siddhant from Beyond. My question is, have we invited all the countries in our neighborhood?
Slowly. Yes, Siddhant.
So have we invited all the countries in our neighborhood, especially countries in our neighborhood who are towards our west?
Like?
Pakistan.
Oh, really?
And Afghanistan.
Okay. Okay. Who else had a hand up here? Yashi? I'll go.
So this is Yeshi Seli from the New Indian Express. I'd like to know how many heads of state are virtually going to take part in this conference, and which are the non-G20 countries who are going to take part?
Sorry?
The non-G20 countries, he said, are also... Yeah.
Yashi, I have to interrupt you on the last question. There are more than 120 invitations which are being sent, or more than 100. There are obviously lots and lots of countries which are non-G20. So I hope you withdraw that question. How many heads of state, or which heads of state you have? Somebody else had a hand up. I'll take one more and we'll come back to it. Sudhi, one second.
Sir, Shulika from the Bloomberg. Here, sir. Any elaboration that you can give us on the summit that the finance minister is holding, and in particular, any discussions that we're doing on debt?
The ministerial.
The ministerial, sir.
Okay.
On debt of, the global south and access to finance.
Okay. So I think we'll just take these four and then come down to another set of questions. So basically, sir, if I could summarize for you, Kavita wanted to know about China-Ukraine invite and joint declaration. Siddhant, are all countries in our neighborhood, particularly in the West, invited? Yashi on how many heads of state, and Sudhi on elaboration on the finance ministers meeting, particularly on debt. So,
yeah. I think if I could start with the question that our friend from Bloomberg asked on what would be the focus priority areas of discussions under the finance minister's track. It's a very common understanding that in terms of the kind of challenges that the developing world today faces, a very large segment of it obviously has a finance dimension to it. So whether it is the very fundamental question of how do you finance your development itself, one. Two, in doing so, how do you actually avoid falling in debt trap? Three, again, as part of your financing of development, how do you structure your development aid and development partnerships with your different partners across the world? For any developing society, one of the key parameters is always how do you ensure financial inclusion, which is again a part of putting financing structures of your development space. And of course, increasingly in recent years, and of course going forward in the future also, what is the interface of technology with finance in which it impacts the development, obviously in a positive way. When you talk of technological digital public goods that interface with the world of finance in a manner that actually propels the development of a country. So I would say these would, broadly speaking, as I said, this is still in planning phase, it's being developed. So I'm sure as we go forward, this would assume a much sharper shape in terms of specifics of the topic. But if you were to look at the broad general scope of discussions, we would assume that the finance minister's track would focus, among other things, on these elements of the discussions, which are so very relevant and pertinent for the countries of the global south. In terms of the question from सिद्धांत एंड कविता जोशी जी, एक प्रकार से यदि आपके प्रश्न का भी भाग देखा जाए तो शायद both of them are together and in some ways, and as I've mentioned very early on in my remarks, that invitations are going across to more than 120 countries of the global south. As we go along towards the date of the summit, we would of course be very happy to share with you the list of confirmed participants across various sessions, and that would include sessions relating to the head of the state and head of the government. As I mentioned to you, that each session would have participating countries either as HOS, HOG level or at the ministerial level that would range between 10 and 20. Thank you.
Joint declaration, you already answered.
Yeah, joint declaration part I already mentioned to you in my remarks, that what we propose to release is a summarized synthesis of the perspectives, the ideas, the inputs, the priorities that the participating countries would share during the summit, and put it out for the benefit of course, all the participating countries, but also for the world outside to know what the thinking during the summit has been of the participating leaders and the ministers. Thank you.
Next, yeah, I'll come to you. Yeah, go ahead, microphone, one by one.
फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी सर, मैं मधुरेंद्र न्यूज़ नेशन से। अभी आपने एक वर्ड यूज किया कि जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ हैं वो डेट ट्रैप में ना फंसे। ये एक महत्वपूर्ण विषय है जिस पर बातचीत होगी डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज पार्टनर के साथ जिनको इनवाइट किया गया है। मैं जानना चाहूँगा कि क्या हमारा सीधा इशारा चीन की तरफ है, जिसके डेट ट्रैप में फंसकर श्रीलंका जैसा देश जो है वो आर्थिक रूप से बदहाल हो गया, और तमाम कई ऐसे डेवलपिंग देश जो हैं वो भी चीन के डेट ट्रैप में फंसे हुए हैं।
Somebody else, Manish, I'll come to you.
Foreign Secretary Manish Chand, India Rights Network. When we talk about Global South, obviously Africa is a large part of Global South. My question to you is that we are holding the Digital Summit, a very laudable initiative, but we haven't done a summit with African countries since 2015. Can we expect a similar digital summit or something like that in this year? This year being the year of global
Virtual summit is what you mean?
Yeah, virtual or physical, ideally physical. But we haven't had time to do that with Africa for many, many years now.
I will happily say that this is beyond the scope of this. So just now, I'm taking your question. I can let you complete the question.
The question which can be answered is about African.
No, that's one thing. Yeah, I will park that question my way. Sorry. Yeah, Nanima, before you. Nanima, go ahead.
Nanima from ABP Live. Sir, I would like to know why suddenly this decision to hold a summit of the G20, the Global South. Will the inputs go into the final G20 decision? And also, is it because we are the G20 president? Will you continue this once the G20 presidency will be over? Thank you.
Yes, and yeah, I'll come back to that. I saw you.
Tripti Nath, I'm an independent journalist, Foreign Secretary. I would like to know this initiative that you've embarked on inviting non-G20 countries seems to be very meaningful, but would this also pave the way somehow in the course of the year for these non-G20 countries to get a chance to participate because they're giving their inputs and suggestions?
As you know, our invitation for the G20 summit, if you're talking about, we have already announced who we are inviting for that summit. So unless we have something more to share, I'm not sure if that question is worth, but I'll ask. So just take 4 questions, and then I'll come back another round.
Sure. So, I think let me just start from the last question that Tripti asked, and as Arindam replied, we have already announced some time ago the countries that are going to be invited to participate in the G20, besides the membership of the G20, and which includes, of course, the member countries and the international organizations, both which have traditionally participated and which are being specifically invited for this. So that list is already available in public for us to see. But I think, as I mentioned in my remarks, this Voice of Global South Summit is a great opportunity for us and for the countries of the Global South to make their voice heard through this summit and try and factor that into various deliberations of the G20 summit itself. So in that sense, what they share during the Voice of Global South Summit, both in terms of their interest, their concerns, their priorities, I think would provide a very relevant input and important feed into the discussions of various working groups, ministerial sessions, and eventually, of course, the summit of the G20. As I mentioned, in the G20, we already cooperate and coordinate very closely with the existing members of the G20. So this summit would be, among other things, an opportunity for the non-G20 membership to share their, as I said, perspectives and priorities, which we could try and put forward to the deliberations in the G20. मधुसेंद्र जी, जो आपका प्रश्न ऋण के भार को लेके, डेट ट्रैप को लेके था, जो हमारे ब्लूमबर्ग के मित्र ने प्रश्न पूछा था, उसका मुख्य सार ये था कि वित्त मंत्री के ट्रैक में, अर्थ मंत्रियों के ट्रैक में जो डिस्कशन होगा, उसका क्या मूल स्वरूप होगा, क्या उसका एक प्रकार से प्रकार होगा. तो मैंने कहा था कि विकास की यात्रा में जो एक सबसे मुख्य प्रभावशाली जो एक बिंदु है, वो है कि विकास की फाइनेंसिंग किस प्रकार से की जाए. और ये स्वाभाविक है, कोई भी देश नहीं चाहेगा कि विकास की जब वित्तीय ज़रूरतों की पूर्ति हो तो उससे एक ऋण के भार में वो दबे. किसी भी देश की ये अभिलाषा नहीं होती है. तो ये स्वाभाविक है कि जब निमंत्रित देश जब अपने विकास की यात्रा, विकास के अनुभवों, उनके विकास की क्षमताएं, उनके विकास का क्या परिप्रेक्ष्य है, क्या भविष्य है, देखते हैं, क्या उनके अनुभव रहे हैं, जब वो इन बातों को वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ समिट में उजागर करेंगे, तो ये स्वाभाविक है कि वो उसमें विकास की यात्रा में क्या समस्याएं आती हैं, ऋण भी एक प्रकार से समस्या है, उसका जिक्र भी करेंगे. ये केवल उसी तक सीमित है, इसको किसी देश विशेष के परिप्रेक्ष्य से देखना मेरे हिसाब से उचित नहीं रहेगा. Manish, your question with regard to the Global South Summit and how we have been engaging with Africa. I think
विदेश मंत्रालय की प्रेस वार्ता में विदेश सचिव विनय क्वात्रा ने संवाददाताओं को जानकारी दी कि भारत 12 और 13 जनवरी को